The coastal town of Saltmere clung to the edge of the world, where jagged cliffs met the restless grey sea. It was a place of whispered legends and salt-streaked windows, where the air carried the tang of brine and the distant cry of gulls. For Clara Henshaw, Saltmere was a refuge. At 31, she had arrived a year ago, fleeing a life in the city that had crumbled under the weight of a bitter divorce. With her modest savings, she opened Driftwood Brew, a small coffee shop perched on the town's main street, its walls lined with weathered planks and shelves of sea-glass trinkets. The locals had warmed to her quickly. Her quiet determination and warm hazel eyes made her one of their own. Clara's days were filled with the hiss of the espresso machine and the murmur of familiar voices. But it was Owen who had brought light to her quieter moments. He'd appeared in Saltmere 6 months ago, a newcomer like her, with a crooked grin and a knack for fixing things. He'd repaired her shop's leaky roof after a storm, and their conversations over coffee stretched into evenings by the shore. Soon they were inseparable. Clara found herself trusting again, her guarded heart softening under his steady presence. But something had begun to unravel. It started with the books. Clara wasn't a numbers person, so when Owen offered to handle the shop's finances, citing his past as a freelance accountant, she'd agreed gratefully. He'd take the ledger home each week, returning it balanced and neat. Yet lately, she'd noticed the till seemed lighter than it should. Orders were up, tourists trickled in for her signature lavender lattes, but the numbers didn't match. Doubt crept in, a shadow she couldn't shake. On a night when the wind howled and the sea thrashed against the cliffs, Clara sat alone in the shop after closing. Rain drummed against the windows, casting fractured reflections across the wooden counter. She opened the ledger, her fingers tracing the columns Owen had filled. The discrepancies glared back at her, hundreds missing here, 1,000 there. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. She grabbed her phone, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "Owen, I need you to come to the shop, now." He arrived 20 minutes later, his dark hair damp from the storm, his jacket dripping onto the floor. "Clara, what's going on? You sounded upset." She slid the ledger across the counter, her eyes locked on his. "Tell me where the money went, Owen. Because this," she tapped the page, "says it's gone." His face tightened, a flicker of panic breaking through his usual calm. "There's got to be an error. Let me take a look." "No," she cut in, her tone sharp. "I've looked. I've checked every entry. Money's missing, and you're the only one who's touched these books." Owen's shoulders sagged, and he ran a hand through his hair, avoiding her gaze. "Clara, I didn't want you to find out like this." "Find out what?" Her voice rose, anger edging out the hurt. "That you've been stealing from me." "It's not that simple," he said, his words tumbling out. "I've got gambling debts. I thought I could cover them, win it back. I was going to replace every cent before you noticed." Clara stared at him, the air between them thick with betrayal. "Gambling? You've been using my Shop Me Life dough pay off your mistakes." "I didn't mean to hurt you," he pleaded, stepping closer. "I swear I'll fix this. I just need time." "Time?" she snapped, her hands balling into fists. "I trusted you, Owen. I let you in, and you've been lying to me this whole time." Before he could respond, a sharp knock rattled the shop's door. Clara flinched. It was past midnight, the storm raging outside. Who would be here now? Owen's eyes widened, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Don't answer it." But the knock came again, louder, insistent. Clara crossed the room, peering through the fogged glass. 2 figures loomed in the shadow stall, broad-shouldered, their faces obscured by hoods. One of them pounded the door again. "Owen," a gruff voice called through the wind. "We know you're in there. Open up or we'll come in ourselves." Clara spun to face him, her pulse racing. "Who are they?" "They're the ones I owe," Owen said, his voice trembling. "Clara, please don't let them in. They're dangerous. I didn't want you caught up in this." The door shuddered under another blow, wood creaking as the men outside grew impatient. Clara's mind raced. Owen had betrayed her, torn apart the fragile trust she'd rebuilt. But now, standing between him and the shadowed figures beyond the door, she faced a choice. Turn him over and wash her hands of this mess, or protect him, risking everything she'd fought to create. The next strike against the door sent a splinter flying. Time was running out. Clara's heart thundered in her chest, matching the storm's fury as it battered the windows of Driftwood Brew. The shop's front door rattled again, the wood groaning under another heavy blow. Owen stood frozen behind the counter, his wide eyes pleading with her. "Clara, please don't let them in." She owed him nothing not after he'd lied about why he'd come to her shop, dragging trouble to her doorstep. But something in his trembling hands and broken voice tugged at her. She'd clawed her way back from betrayal after her divorce. She understood desperation. And with the wind howling and the men outside growing impatient, she had no time to debate her instincts. "Hide," she ordered, her voice a sharp whisper as she pointed to the narrow staircase behind the counter. "Upstairs now. Lock the door and stay quiet." Owen hesitated, guilt etched across his pale face. "Clara, Go!" She cut him off, her tone leaving no room for argument. He nodded and bolted up the stairs, his footsteps fading as the pounding on the door intensified. Clara steadied herself, brushing damp hair from her face. She wasn't sure why she was protecting Himmenly that she couldn't let those men storm in and take him. Not yet. Crossing the dimly lit shop, she cracked the door open just enough to see two figures looming in the rain. Their hooded silhouettes towered against the stormy night, water streaming off them like they'd crawled out of the sea itself. "What do you want?" she called, her voice firm despite the knot in her stomach. The taller man stepped closer, his gravelly voice cutting through the wind. "Owen, he's got a debt to settle, and we're here to collect." "He's not here," Clara lied, gripping the door tighter. "It's just me." The man's eyes narrowed, and he jammed his boot into the gap before she could shut him out. "We saw him come in, lady. Don't waste our time. Hand him over, and we won't touch you." Her pulse raced. She couldn't fight them off, but maybe she could stall. "He's gone," she insisted. "Slipped out the back when he heard you. Look, if it's money you want, I've got the till, take it and go." The shorter man, broad and sneering, laughed darkly. "Your coffee money won't cut it. Owen's in deep way past petty cash. Let us in, or this shop won't be standing tomorrow." Fear surged through her, but she swallowed it down. "You're not coming in," she said, her voice like steel. "How much does he owe? Maybe we can work something out." The tall man tilted his head, rain dripping from his hood. 10 grand, plus interest. Got that stashed in your tip jar?" Clara's stomach plummeted. $10,000? That was more than she'd saved in years, more than the shop pulled in during tourist season. "I don't," she admitted, "but I could get it. Just give me time." He barked a laugh, harsh and humorless. "Time's not free. Got anything else to sweeten the deal?" Her gaze darted to the Shelvesea glass baubles, faded maps, worthless trinkets. Then she remembered the safe in the back room, tucked behind a stack of old crates. When she'd bought the shop, it held only one thing: an antique pocket watch, tarnished but ornate, with an inscription too worn to decipher. She'd kept it as a keepsake, but maybe it had value. "Wait here," she said, easing the door shut just enough to slip away. She hurried to the safe, her hands unsteady as she retrieved the watch. Its weight felt heavier now, the metal cold against her palm. Back at the door, she held it up. "Take this. It's old, could be worth something. Use it as collateral until I get the cash." The tall man snatched it, inspecting it under the faint glow of the shop's lantern. His eyes widened briefly, a flicker of something recognition crossing his face. "Where'd you get this?" "It was here when I moved in," Clara said, watching him closely. "Why? What is it?" He didn't answer, but his stance softened, the menace in him dimming. "This changes things," he muttered, almost to himself. He exchanged a quick look with his partner, who gave a curt nod. "All right, you've got 3 days. Get the money, or we're back for Owen and this won't save him again." Clara blinked, caught off guard by the shift. 3 days? That's... "Take it or leave it," he snapped, pocketing the watch. "Tell Owen we're watching. He runs, we'll know." They turned and melted into the storm, leaving Clara staring after them. She slammed the door shut, bolting it with shaking hands, and slumped against it, her breath ragged. 3 days to find $10,000, lose everything she'd built. The stairs creaked, and Owen crept down, his face ghostly white. "Clara, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this." She spun on him, fury and fear erupting. "Sorry? You've endangered my life, Owen. Who are those men? How did you get in debt for 10 grand? He sank onto a stool, head in his hands. "They work for Victor Kane," He runs gambling rings up the coast underground stuff. I thought I could win enough to clear what I owed, but I kept losing. When I couldn't pay, he sent them. Clara's mind spun. And you brought them here? To my shop? I was scared, he whispered, voice cracking. I had nowhere else to go. But that watch, where'd you say you found it? In the safe? Why? Owen looked up, urgency sharpening his gaze. I've heard rumors about a watch like that, linked to a shipwreck near Saltmere. If it's the one I'm thinking of, it might be worth way more than 10 grand. Her pulse quickened. You're saying it could get us out of this? Maybe, he said, standing. But we'd need to prove its value fast. Before she could respond, the shop's phone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the silence. Clara flinched, nerves raw, and crossed to the counter to answer. Driftwood Brew. A familiar, gravelly voice rasped through the line. 3 days, Clara Henshaw, and we're watching. The call cut off. Clara set the receiver down, ice flooding her veins. They knew her name. This wasn't just Owen's fight anymore, it was hers. She turned to him, her voice steady despite the dread coiling inside her. We're finding out what that watch is worth, and you're helping me, whether you like it or not. The storm had passed by morning, leaving Saltmere drenched in a heavy, uneasy calm. Clara hadn't slept. The weight of the previous night clung to her like the damp air, thick and suffocating. She stood behind the counter of Driftwood Brew, staring at the empty safe where the watch had been. The shop felt different now, its once cozy corners shadowed by the threat hanging over her. 3 days. She had 3 days to find $10,000, or uncover the watch's true value, assuming Owen's hunch was right. She glanced at him, slumped in a chair by the window, nursing a cup of coffee she'd brewed out of habit. His face was drawn, dark circles bruising his eyes. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. We need to talk to someone who knows about that watch, Clara said, breaking the silence. You mentioned a shipwreck. What do you know? Owen straightened, rubbing his temples. It's just a story I heard from the locals. There was a ship, the Silver Crest, that went down near here in the 1800s. Supposedly, it was carrying something valuable, but no one's ever found it. Rumor is, the captain had a watch like the one you had engraved with a crest or something. Clara's mind raced. So if that watch is from the Silver Crest, it could be worth a fortune? Maybe, he said cautiously. But we'd need proof, and even then, selling it in 3 days? That's a long shot. She crossed her arms, frustration simmering. It's the only shop we've got. There's a historian in town, Eleanor Gray. She runs the Maritime Museum. If anyone knows about the Silver Crest, it's her. Owen hesitated, his gaze flicking to the door. Clara, those men are watching. If we start asking questions, they'll know we're onto something. We don't have a choice, she snapped. Unless you've got 10 grand hidden somewhere, this is our only way out. He sighed, defeated. All right. But we need to be careful. The Saltmere Maritime Museum was a weathered building at the edge of town, its walls lined with faded maps and glass cases of salvaged relics. Eleanor Gray, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, greeted them with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Clara Henshaw, she said, her voice crisp. I've heard about your coffee shop. What brings you here? Clara forced a smile, though her nerves buzzed. We're hoping you can help us with some local history, specifically about the Silver Crest. Eleanor's smile faltered, her gaze sharpening. The Silver Crest? That's an old tale. Why the sudden interest? Owen stepped forward, his tone casual. Just curious. I heard there was a watch tied to the ship, thought it might make a good story for the shop's blog. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. A blog, Well, the Silver Crest did sink off this coast in 1847. It was a merchant ship, but legend says it carried more than just cargo. Some believe it was smuggling a rare artifactor jeweled watch commissioned for a European duke. But that's all speculation. No one's ever found proof. Clara's pulse quickened. If someone did find that watch, what would it be worth? Eleanor tilted her head, studying them. Hypothetically, tens of thousands, maybe more. But it's a moot point. The watch, if it exists, is probably at the bottom of the sea. Clara exchanged a glance with Owen. What if it wasn't? What if someone had it? Eleanor's expression shifted, suspicion creeping in. Then I'd say they should be very careful. Treasure hunters have a way of attracting trouble. She paused, her eyes lingering on Clara. Is there something you're not telling me? Before Clara could respond, the museum's door creaked open. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, his face obscured by a hood. Clara's stomach dropped. It was one of the debt collectors. "Morning," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Just browsing." Eleanor stiffened, her gaze flicking between the man and Clara. "We're about to close for lunch," she said curtly. "Come back later." The man didn't move, his eyes fixed on Clara. "No need. I'll be quick." Clara's throat tightened. They were being watched, just as Owen had feared. She grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the door. "Thanks for your time, Eleanor. We'll be going." As they hurried past the man, he leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "Tick-tock, Clara. 2 days left." She didn't look back. Back at the shop, Clara paced the floor, her mind spinning. "They're following us. How are we supposed to find anything with them breathing down our necks?" Owen sank onto a stool, his face pale. "Maybe we should just give them the watch back, tell them it's valuable, and let them take it." "No," Clara said sharply. "They'd still come after you for the debt, and besides, that watch was in my shop, it's mine. If it's worth something, I'm not handing it over to thugs." He looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You're still helping me? After everything?" Clara stopped pacing, her anger softening just a fraction. "I'm helping myself. If I lose you to them, I lose any chance of getting that money back. We're in this together now, whether I like it or not." Owen nodded, gratitude and guilt warring on his face. "So what's next?" She took a deep breath. "We need to find proof that the watch is from the Silver Crest. If Eleanor won't help, maybe there's another way. Old records, ship, manifests something." "There's the library," Owen suggested. "They've got archives, but with those men tailing us." Clara's gaze drifted to the window where the sea stretched out, grey and endless. "Then we'll have to be smarter. Sneak in after hours." His eyes widened. "You're suggesting we break in?" "I'm suggesting we do whatever it takes," she said, her voice steady. "Unless you've got a better idea." Owen was silent for a long moment, then shook his head. "All right, tonight then." The Saltmere Library was a squat, ivy-covered building that looked as though it had stood since the town's founding. At midnight, with the streets empty and the moon hidden behind clouds, Clara and Owen crept through the shadows to the back entrance. Clara's hands shook as she worked a bobby pin into the lock, her only knowledge of lock-picking coming from old movies. After several tense minutes, the latch clicked open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and aged paper. They moved quickly, guided by the faint glow of Owen's phone, to the archives in the basement. Rows of metal shelves loomed, packed with boxes of yellow documents. "Start with the 1840s, Clara whispered, pulling a box labeled Maritime Records from the shelf. They spread the papers on the floor, scanning for any mention of the Silver Crest. Time slipped away as they sifted through logs and ledgers, the silence broken only by the rustle of paper and their shallow breaths. Clara's eyes burned with fatigue, but she pressed on, driven by the ticking clock in her mind. Then, tucked in a folder of shipping manifests, she found a brittle, handwritten list of the Silver Crest's cargo. Her heart raced as she ran her finger down the page. Silk, spices, wine, pocket watch, gold, engraved with crest. "Owen," she breathed, holding up the paper. "It's real. The watch was on the ship." He leaned over, his face lighting up. "That's it. Proof." But before they could celebrate, a creak echoed from the stairs. They froze, listening. Footsteps heavy and deliberated descended into the basement. Clara's blood ran cold. They weren't alone. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears as she and Owen stood cornered in the park, the collectors closing in under the dim glow of the streetlights. Their menacing silhouettes loomed larger with each step, and the weight of the watch in her pocket felt like a lifeline slipping away. Then, like a spark in the dark, the clue Eleanor had deciphered clicked into place. Where the tide meets the dawn, the crest awaits. It wasn't just poetic nonsense, it was the mural behind the counter at Driftwood Brew, a wave cresting beneath the sunrise. The answer had been in her shop all along. "Owen," she hissed, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "The shop. That's where it's hidden." His eyes flicked to hers, sharp with understanding. But before he could reply, the taller collector lunged, his hand outstretched for the watch. Clara sidestepped, grabbing Owen's sleeve and yanking him toward the street. "Run!" They bolted through Saltmere's shadowed lanes, the collector's boots pounding the pavement in pursuit. Clara's legs ached, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but she pushed forward, driven by the faint hope that the shop held their salvation. The salty tang of the sea mingled with the night air as they wove through alleys, dodging overturned crates and leaping over puddles. Driftwood Brew emerged ahead, its weathered sign swaying faintly in the breeze. Clara fumbled for her keys, her fingers trembling as the collector's shouts grew louder. "Come on," she muttered, shoving the key into the lock. The door swung open, and they stumbled inside, slamming it shut just as the collectors reached the porch. Owen heaved a table against the door, his face slick with sweat. "That won't hold them for long." "We don't need long," Clara said, darting to the counter, her eyes locked on the Morala wave curling into a crest kissed by golden light. "It's here. I know it." She ran her hands along the wall, searching for a seam, a catch anything. Owen joined her, tapping the wood with his knuckles. A hollow thud sounded beneath his touch. "Here," he said, pressing harder. With a groan, a panel slid aside, revealing a dusty alcove. Inside sat a wooden chest, its edges worn smooth by time. Clara's breath hitched as she lifted the lid. Inside lay a trove of yellowed documents, a handful of tarnished artifacts coins, a sextant, a rusted daggerand, a sealed envelope, bearing her name in her grandmother's elegant script. But before she could process the find, the door shuddered under a heavy blow. The collectors were breaking through. "Grab it," Owen urged, lifting the chest. "We need to." The door splintered, and the collectors stormed in, their faces twisted with fury. "No more games," the taller one snarled, advancing with purpose. Clara stepped forward, clutching the envelope, her fear giving way to resolve. "Stop!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. She held up a document from the Chester Ledger detailing illegal shipwreck excavations and artifact smuggling, all signed by Victor Kane. "This ties Kane to crimes that'll ruin him. If you don't back off, I'll take it to the police. You'll all go down." The collectors hesitated, their bravado faltering. "You're bluffing," the shorter one growled, but doubt crept into his tone. "Test me," Clara shot back, her gaze unflinching. "Or tell Kane that Owen's debt is wiped, and you leave us be. We'll keep this quiet if you do." The taller collector's jaw clenched, but after a charged silence, he nodded grudgingly. "Deal. But if you double-cross us, you won't live to regret it." With a final glare, they retreated, the door banging shut behind them. Clara exhaled, her legs nearly giving out as the adrenaline ebbed. Owen slumped against the counter, his breath ragged. "You did it," he said, awe threading his voice. "You saved us." "We saved each other," she corrected, her heart still pounding. She turned to the envelope and tore it open, unfolding a letter written in her grandmother's hand. "My dearest Clara, if you found this, you followed the watch and faced trials I never could. These artifacts are yours, as is Driftwood Brew. But more than that, I leave you the strength to claim the life you deserve. Saltmere is your home, and you are braver than you know. With all my love, Grandma." Tears blurred Clara's vision as she traced the words, a flood of warmth and grief washing over her. She glanced at Owen, who watched her with quiet reverence. "She knew I'd need this," Clara murmured. "She knew I'd find my way." "She was right," Owen said softly. "You're incredible." Clara wiped her eyes, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "We'll give the artifacts to the museum," she decided. "Let them tell Saltmere's story. And with Kane gone, we can finally start over." Owen hesitated, then reached for her hand, his touch tentative. "Can I stay? Help you rebuild? I know I messed up, Clara, but I want to earn your trust." She studied him, the man who'd betrayed her, yet stood by her when it mattered most. "No more secrets," she said firmly. "We do this together, or not at all." He squeezed her hand, his eyes bright with relief and something deeper. "Together," he promised. As dawn broke over Saltmere, spilling golden light through the shop's windows, Clara felt the shadows of her past lift. Betrayal, danger, and loss had tested her, but she'd emerged stronger, rooted in the town she loved. With the scent of coffee, and the distant roar of the sea, Driftwood Brew stood as her haven, now perhaps a new beginning.